For more than 50 years, Danny DeVito and Rhea Perlman have been one of Hollywood's most unusual love stories. They met in 1970. They started dating in 1971. They moved in together after just 2 weeks. They got married in 1982. They had 3 children. They built careers. They built a family. And then, after more than 3 decades of marriage, they separated. But here's the part that still leaves people confused. They never divorced. In fact, after announcing their separation, they reconciled. Then they separated again. And somehow, after all of that, they remained close. So what actually happened between Danny DeVito and Rhea Perlman? The truth is much more complicated. And the strangest part is that the 2 people at the center of this story seem to have accepted something that the public still struggles to understand. You can stop being married in the traditional sense without completely stopping being family. And perhaps that's exactly what happened to Danny and Rhea. But to understand how they got here, you have to go back to the very beginning. In 1970, Rhea Perlman went to see a friend performing in a Broadway production called The Shrinking Bride. She wasn't there looking for a husband. She certainly wasn't expecting to meet the man she would eventually spend more than 50 years connected to. But Danny DeVito was also part of the production, and something clicked. The attraction was immediate enough that, according to accounts of their relationship, the 2 began dating the following year. They were young actors trying to make their way in an industry that was anything but predictable. But there was something about their relationship that worked. They moved in together after only 2 weeks. And unlike the Hollywood couples who seemed perfect in public before suddenly collapsing behind closed doors, Danny and Rhea appeared to build their relationship in a much more ordinary way. They lived together. They worked. They argued. They made up. They grew. And eventually, they became parents. Their first child, Lucy, was born in 1983, followed by Grace in 1985 and Jacob in 1987. By then, Danny and Rhea were no longer just a young couple trying to survive Hollywood. They were a family, and their careers were taking off at the same time. Rhea became internationally known as Carla Tortelli on Cheers, a role that earned her 4 Emmy Awards. Danny had already become famous through Taxi, before building a huge film career with movies including Twins, Batman Returns, Get Shorty, and Matilda. And here's where their relationship became even more unusual. They weren't simply 2 actors who happened to be married. They became creative partners. Together, they founded Jersey Films, a production company that was involved in films such as Pulp Fiction, Aaron Brockovich, and Garden State. So while the public saw Danny and Rhea as the quirky Hollywood couple who had somehow stayed together for decades, there was much more happening behind the scenes. They were raising children, running a production company, building careers, and maintaining a marriage in an industry where relationships rarely survive that kind of pressure. For years, they seemed to have figured it out. In fact, Rhea once described their relationship as so solid that it would take a lot to break them apart. And Danny's own explanation for their longevity was remarkably simple: love. But then, in 2012, something changed. The announcement shocked people. After approximately 30 years of marriage, Danny DeVito and Rhea Perlman had separated. And suddenly, one of Hollywood's most enduring relationships was in trouble. But unlike some celebrity breakups, there was no immediate public scandal explaining everything. No dramatic press conference, public war, or an attempt to turn the other person into a villain. Instead, the details remained private, and that silence created an enormous amount of speculation. What had happened? Was it their careers? Was it years of tension? Had they simply grown apart? The truth is, we don't know every reason. What we do know is that Rhea later acknowledged that there were a lot of reasons behind the breakup, many difficult factors she prefers to keep private. However, media outlets heavily attributed the initial 2012 split to fatigue over Danny DeVito's flirtatious behavior and independent lifestyle. But then something happened that made their situation even more confusing. They got back together. In December 2012, just months after their separation became public, Danny told Extra that he and Rhea were working on getting back together. He described them as still being close and essentially together, although separated. And by March 2013, reports indicated that they had reconciled. For a moment, it looked like the Hollywood love story had been saved. After more than 40 years together, perhaps Danny and Rhea had managed to repair whatever had gone wrong. But that wasn't the end. In 2017, they separated again. And this time, something was different. They didn't rush toward divorce. They didn't appear determined to destroy the relationship completely. Instead, they settled into something that sounds almost impossible to explain if you think about relationships in black and white terms. They lived separately, but they remained close. They saw each other. They continued to share a family, and they remained legally married. That's the part that has fascinated people for years. Because what exactly does it mean to be separated from someone for almost a decade and still call them family? Rhea eventually answered that question herself. In 2023, she spoke openly about their unusual situation and made it clear that she and Danny were still legally married. She also said they were very good friends, saw each other often, and that their family remained the most important thing to both of them. But she didn't pretend the separation had been easy. Quite the opposite. Rhea admitted that the initial split had been very difficult, and that admission changes the entire way you look at their story. Because this wasn't necessarily two people who casually decided they were better off apart. There was pain. There were reasons. There was a period when something between them had become difficult enough that they couldn't continue living as a traditional married couple. But somewhere along the way, they found a different way to relate to each other. And perhaps that's why Danny has never treated Rhea like an ex-wife in the usual Hollywood sense. Even when they're no longer living together, she remains part of his life, part of his family, part of his history, and in many ways still part of his present. That became especially obvious as their children grew older. Lucy, Grace, and Jacob all found their own paths, with Lucy becoming an actress, Grace working as an artist, and Jacob becoming involved in producing and directing. Danny has spoken proudly about his children's creative careers, and in 2025, he discussed the family even collaborating on a film project. The children may be adults now, but the family connection clearly hasn't disappeared. And then came another major transition. Grandchildren. Rhea has spoken about the profound love she felt after becoming a grandmother, describing it as a feeling that reminded her of the love she experienced when her own children were born. Meanwhile, Danny has continued working at an astonishing pace. At 80, he remains active in film and television, including his long-running role as Frank Reynolds on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Rhea has also continued acting, appearing in projects including Barbie. So while their marriage changed, neither of them simply disappeared into retirement. They kept working, they kept creating, and they kept showing up for their family. But here's where Danny and Rhea's story becomes genuinely fascinating. The public has spent years waiting for the final chapter, the divorce, the dramatic explanation, the moment when one of them finally says, "This is what really happened." But that moment never came, and perhaps it never will, because the people involved seem to have reached a place where they no longer need to define their relationship according to everyone else's expectations. They're separated, they're still married, that they're friends, that they're family, and they see each other. All of those things can apparently be true at the same time. And that may be why Danny DeVito's relationship with Rhea Perlman is so different from the typical celebrity breakup. There is no clean ending. There is no obvious villain. There isn't even a conventional reconciliation. Instead, there's something much messier. Two people who spent decades together reached a point where they couldn't continue their marriage in the same way. They tried to reconcile. It didn't last. They separated again. And rather than destroying everything they had built, they found another way to remain connected.